Nurses of Reddit. What's the most entertaining thing someone has said coming off of anesthesia? Patient here with a great story nonetheless. When I got my wisdom teeth removed, I apparently had a religious experience. I'm agnostic. I told my mom, who was with me, that I saw people walking on water. Next, I kept telling her I saw Jesus. Apparently, when the female nurse came back into the room, I did the Catholic sign of the cross and whispered to my mom, "That's him. That's Jesus." The nurse lost her crap. Story 2. Yartek here. We often do conscious sedations with ketamine to realign broken bones. I had a 10-year-old girl who snapped her arm on the trampoline. When she was coming off the ketamine slumber, she asked why she saw God. Little freaky. She also snarfed down 4 PB&J sandwiches after, and I was impressed. The best has to be the sledding accident kid who snapped his tibia. When he was coming out of the ketamine sleep, he begged us not to tell his mom he smoked weed for the first time the day before. His mom was in the room while this was taking place. Story 3. I work in the OR. Funniest was a guy quickly sat up after extubation. We're all standing around him making sure he doesn't try to jump off the table. He looks at me and then slowly gives me double finger guns. Turns his head to another staff member and slowly gives them finger guns. Didn't say a word. Just finger guns. A lot of people wake up really crazy. They start swinging or just get really restless on a narrow OR bed. It's nice when people wake up sleepy and I'll just bundle them up with blankies and roll out. Story 4. Me coming out of it at the dentist's office. You have to save them. Dentist. Save who? The owls. What owls? The owls trapped inside the gas machine. They were hooting. I could hear them. You have to save them. OP, we need some follow-up. Did they save the owls? I gotta know. Story 5. When I was in high school, I was just getting put under and feeling loopy for a wisdom teeth operation, and the nurse was making small talk with me. She told me she graduated from the same high school I went to and was on the dance team. And I told her, no, you weren't. You have to be pretty to be on the dance team, right before blacking out. I think about this sometimes before I go to sleep at night. Nurse, I am so sorry to do you like that. You were just doing your job. OP, what have you done? I guarantee that nurse also thinks about that. What the hell, man? They might just laugh at it though, hopefully. But like, ooh, yikes. Not saying it's your fault though, I mean, anesthesia goes crazy. Story 6. Not a nurse, but I was in charge of my sister after she got her wisdom teeth out. Got her in the car and she was bawling. Wouldn't stop crying and trying to put fingers in her mouth. Mind you, she was 20 at the time. I got her back to my apartment and she's having a hard time staying upright. So I'm helping support her as we walk to the door. She's still crying, but is now trying to do a heel click. We almost fall over. My neighbor sees us and runs over to help open my door. We get her inside. She then proceeds to spend another hour crying about how she wants to write a Harry Potter / Pride and Prejudice crossover ballet, in which she would play Dumbledore, Lizzie Bennet, and Mr. Darcy herself. I then asked her who I would play. She said Hedwig and Mr. Collins. That's when it stopped being entertaining. Story 7. Not a nurse, but I had dental surgery at a hospital in Bangkok a few years ago. I had pretty much come out of anesthesia, and was just waiting for the doctor and discharge stuff. There was this giant Aussie guy also in recovery, and he kept trying to sneak away. Like he would look around, grab his IV pole, and tiptoe toward the exit. The nurses were just kind of herding him around the room back to his bed. Then he would do the same thing again. The nurse with me asked if I wanted the curtains closed, and I was like, hell no. I just had major oral surgery and this is hilarious. So she and I sat there for nearly 20 minutes watching his shenanigans. Nurses have patience like saints, I swear. Story 8. Not anesthesia, but post-op in ICU. Patient had brain surgery for a neuroma. He had a brain drain in, but otherwise was fine. Hi sir, I have your dinner. Do you need help?
No, I can do it. What is it?
White fish.
Ugh.
It's brain food.
If that's the case, I need a whale.
I laughed for 2 hours after that. Story 9. Was a student nurse for 2 semesters. On a placement in a post-op ward, an old guy had a reaction to the anesthetic. Thought he was back in the Korean War, kept trying to get out of bed to help his mates. The 2 nurses couldn't figure out how to stop him and they called security. Meanwhile, I walked up and in my most officious sounding voice said to the nurse I was partnered with, "Stand down, Lieutenant. I'll take over from here." She looked confused but moved aside. I said to him, "Soldier, you took some shrapnel. You need to rest and recover. Now stand down or I'll have you court-martialed for insubordination. Understood?" He looked at me for a second, looked around, replied nice and loud,
"Yes, ma'am,"
and went back to bed. Well, that's what I get for not reading ahead. That voice I gave doesn't really match up with the whole yes ma'am thing, huh? Oh well. Story 10. Not a nurse, but when I got all 4 of my wisdom teeth out at once, I woke up and immediately asked, can I eat KFC now? And they all got a laugh out of that. That was the only thing I cared about. Probably not as entertaining as I hoped, but I got a laugh out of them, so yay! Edit. Also, yes, I did get KFC after. Just a large mashed potato and mac and cheese. Took me 3 days to finish it all, though. Was told it was fine as long as I was careful about my stitches. Story 11. I worked in an ER and we had a patient. Guy about 18 to 20 years old who had a spontaneous pneumothorax. Collapsed a lung. Not quite as bad as it sounds. He basically had a small area of air between his lung and chest wall. We had to put in a small chest tube to remove the air. We did a moderate sedation, basically kind of knocked him out, but not put him completely under. One of the meds used was Versed, which has an amnesic effect, so they don't remember anything. Procedure is done and I'm monitoring him when he starts coming around. He looks at me and asks, "So, when are we gonna do this thing?" I said, "We're already done. Look at your chest." Had a drain/dressing in place. He looks down, then looks at me and says, "Dude, how'd you do that?" Maybe not the best story here, but it happened 20 plus years ago and still makes me laugh. Story 12. My grandmother gets very angry when she comes out of anesthesia and swears everyone abused her during surgery. The night after her hip surgery and lots of angry accusations and having to be tied to the bed for a good portion of the day, I spent the night with her at the hospital. She had a confusing and restless night and was in a lot of pain, but very out of it. The next day, the doctor came in to talk to her about being moved to the rehab center. She started ranting about how it better not be the same place she slept last night because they made her sleep on the concrete floor of a barn. Everyone tried reasoning with her, but she would just point at me and say, "Ask that girl. She was there." After a few minutes of increasingly agitated ranting, I just said, "It's a different place, Nanny." And that settled that. Story 13. Had my appendix out, and according to my wife, the doctor came around with a bunch of student doctors and pulled my gown to the side to show the keyhole scars. Now, the bottom one is below the pants line, and I wasn't wearing underwear, and apparently I said, "Like you're not impressed," and then closed my eyes. They all had a good laugh, but my wife was mortified, and I was sound asleep. Still hear about it from her almost 10 years later. Story 14. Backstory. My grandmother desperately needed a hip replacement. She didn't want the surgery, but it had reached the point where my grandfather couldn't care for her unless she got it, and had to give her the ultimatum to either have the surgery or move into assisted living, something she absolutely didn't want. She had some onset of dementia, so everyone was extremely worried about what the anesthesia would do to her mental condition. After surgery, they were asking her questions to see if the anesthesia had affected her cognitive functions. My grandfather asked, "Do you know who I am?" And her response was, "You're the dirty little rotten so-and-so who did this to me," as she pointed at her leg. Oh, she had also named both her stuffed cat and her cane George. Anyone else she didn't immediately recognize by name while the anesthesia wore off was also dubbed George. There's nobody in our family named George. Story 15. All the level 1 general anesthesia patients were snoozing and in no pain. I was walking by and sneezed. I was almost to the door and heard a subdued voice say, "Bless you." Never did figure out which patient, but it was so sweet. Another time it was a coworker who had had surgery, and when I went to check on them, they wailed, "I just want everyone to like me." It was funny as hell because it was a doctor who used to yell a lot. You know, that first one's got me thinking. How many of our, automatic responses or functions would still happen under anesthesia or coming out of it? Because bless you has become a pretty automatic response. I wonder how many drugs it would take to knock that out of me. Story 16. Anesthesia hits my family pretty hard. Low vitals, takes longer to wake up. It can be pretty scary for my mom, who is usually the caretaker. Last winter I had an endoscopy and wasn't waking up. It took a while for me to gain awareness after I did a rise, and the first thing I remember is asking my mom for pancakes. She responded with a worried, "I know, we'll get pancakes later once you're up to it." I was convinced she had been reading my mind and was very concerned about her new psychic abilities, until they told me I'd been awake for about half an hour, and I've asked for pancakes at least 10 times before I regained awareness. Story 17. This was the weirdest thing a nurse said to me as I was coming off of anesthesia. "I had a baby that died. I had 4 children, but only 3 of them lived. I was rushed into the hospital with extreme pain and tons of internal bleeding, and then they found out I had an ectopic pregnancy that had ruptured my fallopian tube, which was a strange surprise, because I barely had any encounter resembling the kinds that get you pregnant. But I guess one crazy sperm managed to get up my tubes despite the lack of reproductive behavior. I hadn't even missed a period or anything. They zoomed me into surgery and gave me lots of drugs. It was a huge relief to have the emergency resolved, and I didn't really actually think of myself as pregnant with a baby. I mostly mostly just thought, I'm dying, holy crap. They actually know what the hell is wrong with me and they're gonna fix it with drugs and medicine crap. Hallelujah. I'm not gonna die. Post-surgery, I woke up quite disoriented and alone with a very kind older nurse woman who promptly told me she once lost a baby. I was very confused for a long while. I really hadn't even processed that I had even been pregnant or lost a baby, so I didn't realize she was trying to comfort me by sharing a shared loss. I just thought that this nurse decided to randomly tell me her baby died as I woke up alone in a room with her, and I was like, oh, that's terrible, you poor stranger lady. I'm so sorry your baby is dead. Why are you telling me this? But in retrospect, aw, how sweet that she tried to be kind. Thanks, nurse lady. Story 18. I was waking up from a tube removal due to an ectopic pregnancy, and I remember hearing the two nurses in recovery giggling and tittering about. I know I said something, but I don't remember what. But they both came right over, and when I opened my eyes, they were both leaning over me asking how I was doing. I told them I was fine, and asked if surgery went well. They said it did. I didn't have my glasses, but the clock was right in front of me. I said, good lord, is it really almost 1 a.m.? They said yes, and I closed my eyes. I could still hear them and chatted with them, but my eyelids were super heavy. I did ask why they weren't pushing me to wake up, and one said, oh honey, you're the only one here. Take your time. About 30 minutes later, I was being wheeled back to my room on my bed and asked if my husband was back yet. He had to leave to go finish a final for his degree, and he passed with flying colors. They said, yep, he's right over there, and pointed to my left. I flung my head to the left and yelled, hey, toots, and fell back asleep. Story 19. Not the nurse, the patient. I have not been given enough gas for the first time. I was still numb, just very vaguely conscious. A nurse reported me for starting to scream anti-Semitic slurs at my surgeon during SEEG electrode implanting. Mind you, from my point of view, it was putting the mask on, taking 3 or 4 drags, wake up some seconds later in a different room. Screaming anti-Semitic slurs at a Jewish man in a Jewish country, with about a third of your skull fully exposed and with holes in it? Not a good idea. Thankfully, he was kind enough to not lobotomize me. Okay, well, we are 19 stories in, and this is the first we're hearing of this. OP, why? Why did this happen? Was it just a situation of like, I know the one thing to not say right now, I gotta make sure I don't say this while I'm on drugs, and then immediately doing it? For the benefit of the doubt, that's what we'll say. Story 20. I came out of anesthesia to a nurse shoving cookies into my mouth, telling me I need to eat. Except I couldn't remember how to chew, so my mouth is full of soggy cookies and I can't chew or talk, so I just grunted like a child at her and shook my head away from her hand. She told my mother, a nurse practitioner and midwife, that I, quote, act really childish. Yeah, no crap. You're airplaning me a cookie when I'm not able to communicate to you that I don't want it. Story 21. So I'm a nurse, but my favorite coming out of anesthesia story was my husband's. I went back to see him in recovery and he was super eager to leave and was trying to remember where he parked. I said, don't worry babe, I'll bring the car around. You know where the car is? I do. I drove us here. You drove us here? Oh my god. You drove us here? Thank you. You're welcome. I was happy to do it. Oh my god. You drove us here. Oh wow. He was close to tears at this point. I took him to lunch after, and he nodded off while staring intently at the novelty salt shaker. My favorite while I was working was a man who woke up from a double great toe amputation and was super worked up about how he was going to wear flip-flops until I suggested he try out slides instead. Story 22. Not a nurse, but still funny. My brother was coming off anesthesia after getting a tube down his throat. He has this issue with the dairy where his throat swells and it's hard for him to swallow things. And he was talking to my mom before saying, Mom, you're a jerk. She asked him why. He just said, you woke me up from the best nap ever. OP, you probably aren't English as a first language, but the issue where dairy makes his throat swell up and it's hard for him to swallow, that's an allergy. And also, same brother. Story 23. Not a nurse. But when my mom came out of anesthesia for her colonoscopy, her doctor showed us pictures of her bowel and she proclaimed, wow, they look like pastries. Shortly after, on the drive home, she asked how her procedure went, even though the doctor and I had told her. I told her the doctor said she would have to not eat spicy food as much because it was causing inflammation. She said, what? No spicy food? What's the point of even living then? She was legitimately upset. Story 24. I once broke my wrist playing soccer in Georgia, the country. It took almost an hour for a sheet metal gray ambulance van with a Red Cross spray painted on the side to arrive in my village. 30 minutes for the ambulance van to restart its engine, with village oafs pushing it down the road, and another hour or so to get me to a city with a proper hospital. By then, I was in need of some proper drugs. The doctors hooked me up to an IV and started palpating my wrist while I laid there watching. I expressed my doubts about the whole procedure. "I don't know, man," I said in English. I could speak Georgian, but had switched over to English for no apparent reason. "That looks like it should really hurt. I don't think the medications are working." And then bam. For an instant, I was as high as I'd ever been on anything. I sat bolt upright in my bed. "My God," I slurred to the doctors. "This is unbelievable. You know what? You guys could make a lot of money if you sold this stuff. Come to America, people would be lining out the door. You could make $1 bazillion if you sold this stuff." Poof. I woke up 2 hours later with my arm done up in the jankiest cast I have ever seen. 7 years later, I still have a decidedly janky left wrist, but I didn't have to pay a cent for it. So I had that going for me, which is nice. Story 25. I was assisting a male patient urinate after his hip surgery. He was having technical difficulties related to the size of the appendage and required some help holding the urinal while he did the aiming. During this already personal encounter, he looks me dead in the eye and says, "Sorry, I'm a grower, not a shower. Just ask my wife." I mentioned it to his wife in the morning and she was incredibly mortified, but we all had a good laugh. He didn't even remember saying it. Story 26. My wife told me this. I was coming out of carpal tunnel surgery, and when I saw the nurse, I told her she had the wrong face, and could she please bring me the right one? When they let my wife back into recovery, I apparently said, "There's my face. That's the right face. Can I have coffee?" Apparently I like her or something. Story 27. I had a rather large female patient one night having a cysto for kidney stones. This was a few days before Thanksgiving. When she was waking up, she looked over, saw my surgical tech, who was a short, stubby dude in his mid-40s, and said, "I think I'm in love with him. Hey, you, wanna go out for tacos? Then you can eat my taco. You can come for Thanksgiving dinner, and I'd even dump my boyfriend for you." I lost it. I don't think I've ever laughed so hard in my life. This was several years ago and I still give him crap about it. Story 28. Not a nurse. Woke up from anesthesia to find my doctor trying to keep a straight face, and my mother looking horrified. Apparently I'd professed my love for the 60-plus-year-old doctor while still loopy, and had propositioned him by promising that I would, quote, conquer his butt, quote. He asked me if I remembered my name, and I'd evidently told him I was Caligula. In my defense, he was kinda cute. Clean-cut guy with salt and pepper hair and bright blue eyes. He admitted he was flattered. Hey, OP, even when you're all drugged up, you know your type. Fair enough. Story 29. As a student nurse, I had a patient who had a water infection, and in the elderly, this can cause temporary confusion. I came to bring her a glass of water, and she looked really upset. "Doris, what's the matter?" I asked her, not her real name.
"Oh, nurse, thank goodness you're here. They've got him."
Who, Doris?
"My son. They have my son."
Her son is like 40. I tried to calm her down. "I'm sure your son is
"The Arabs have him."
I just kinda stare at her.
"We must speak with the Prime Minister urgently to pay their ransom."
I had to duck out on the pretense of calling the Prime Minister so I could laugh. Story 30. My first time with kidney stones, they gave me the good stuff. Went straight to morphine. Since they were still trying to diagnose what was going on, they had to check everything. The incredibly smart and professional doctor that helped me asked all the usual questions, but she wanted to check my prostate just in case. So being whacked out on morphine, my dad, who happened to be there, told them to go ahead. So it was kind of a surprise when I was abruptly rolled over and my prostate was checked. My dad told me later that I looked directly at this doctor, who was a very, very pretty woman, and said something along the lines of, "God damn, you are unbelievably hot, but you are rather dominant and forceful. I'm gonna have to take a pass on this one." Story 31. I'm a nurse, but the patient for this story is my son. He was 3 at the time. When children come off of anesthesia, there's no telling how they'll react. Some yell and scream, some cry, some just look around, etc. Well, my son was coming down after surgery, and the kid next to him, who was maybe 7 or 8 years old, was also coming down. My son would whine if I wasn't holding him, so here we are sitting in this rocking chair, and I'm just rocking him to keep him calm. Every 5 to 10 seconds, the older kid next to him would scream at the top of his lungs, which would startle my son. After about the 3rd or 4th time, my son opened his eyes, rolled his eyes, sat up, and yelled, "Shut up!" in the most long, drawn-out manner ever, then laid back down in my arms and closed his eyes. The kid was giving my son the most serious death glare I have ever seen. The nurses and I all cracked up laughing. It was the first time I'd ever heard him say shut up to anyone, but being the youngest of 5, I'm not surprised. Story 32. Not a nurse. I used to be an ER tech. I was the guy that would put the plaster splints on after the doc set someone's fracture. One day we had this young kid come in, maybe 10 or 11, with a pretty severely displaced radius/ulna fracture. We give him the loopy juice and do our thing. As he's waking up, he looks around the room and goes,
Whoa, I am tripping.
Then he looks straight at his mom and says,
I'm tripping like Snoop Dogg on Friday night.
The doc and I both lost it. Some of the funniest crap I've ever heard. Story 33. I'm a nurse, but this is a personal story. I went with a friend for her egg retrieval procedure, and I was allowed to go in the room to watch the minor surgery. When they finished, they woke her up and walked her back into another room to recover. On the walk back, still super out of it, she kept telling me to get her clothes in the car and we were leaving. After resting in recovery, she continued to argue she was ready to leave when she was swaying and unable to stand on her own. She was pretty upset when I kept telling her, we're not leaving quite yet, and later had zero memory of any of this. Story 34. I was the patient having surgery on my hand while active duty Navy. I was a senior E5, and the doc doing my surgery at the Naval Hospital was an LCDR. We're both stationed in Florida. I'm from Wisconsin, he's from Indiana. The day of the surgery, he wore an Indian Hoosier skull cap in the OR. Apparently, as I was going under, he asked if I was doing all right. To which I replied, yeah, because I'm not some Hoosier coward, sir. Wake up after the procedure and he was completely professional. I had no idea of what I'd said until as I'm leaving he tells me,
See ya for your follow-up, you Wisconsin jerk.
My wife had to explain in the car that I thought it was a good idea to call a senior officer a Hoosier coward. Story 35. Not a nurse, and I guess this wouldn't be considered as entertaining, but when my husband had his heart cath for his heart surgery, the doctor told us that when he woke up, he started talking about how he's gonna go to Hawaii and be with his wife after the surgery, saying she's been wanting to go there. That was a year ago, and my husband didn't make it. When I think about it, I realized how my husband loved me so much that even though he was so sedated, he was still thinking about it. Unlike those videos you see where people are hitting on nurses and stuff. Story 36. I had a minor surgery and in recovery had a pretty rough nurse. She told me to get up and I was 100% convinced I was tied to the bed. I still had all the monitors on me. I just weakly shook the cables at her and told her I was tied down and nearly started crying. She yanked them off me, left the bedside and sent a friend over to get me. I told him I liked his pants and pointed to his hat. Story 37. I saw this patient, 40s male, both going into and coming out of surgery. Very polite and soft-spoken. He was babbling the minute he woke up, but the first sentence that made sense was, Mom, nice to see you. I love you. I'm so glad I got your sweet butt and not Dad's. The ladies love me for it. He essentially screamed this, by the way. The room we were in had 9 other patients, and they were only separated by curtains. Oh, and his mom was just outside waiting to see him. She looked mortified. Hey, all I'll say is when else are you going to thank your parents for something like that? Not being on anesthesia. And you gotta thank him at some point. He recognizes the gift his mother gave him. Story 38. Not a nurse, but I laughed hysterically all through my first time watching the Blair Witch Project thanks to dental anesthesia stuff. I had my wisdom teeth surgically removed at about 14 or 15, which was actually pretty intensive because they were nowhere near surfacing. Afterwards, I remember being high as a kite, and the nurses were really nice while I waited around for my dad to come get me. On the ride home, I kept babbling at my dad about how my lips felt like gum. I actually wound up chewing them pretty badly because he didn't care enough to stop me. He dropped me off at the house, pointed out the pain pills, the freezer full of toaster pastry things, and the movie he'd rented for me, then got back in his car and left me alone for 2 weeks. So, still high as a kite, I stuffed the movie in the VCR and proceeded to laugh and laugh at the Blair Witch Project until I fell asleep. Then I woke up, carefully rewound the movie to where I last remembered, and then hysterically laughed again until I fell asleep again. Rewind, laugh, sleep, over and over. Basically repeated that for hours before the dentist drugs finally wore off enough for me to go looking for pain pills. It was an interesting and very opioid high week or two, left entirely to my own devices. Apparently, I even went to school one day, although I don't remember it at all and failed to take notes. But hey, at least the entire experience taught me that when my dad gets old and needs care, that's very much his own problem, because when I was young and needed it, that was my own problem. Well, OP, your dad is certainly not winning any Father of the Year awards anytime soon. I feel like I must be misremembering my wisdom teeth procedure, because I remember when I had mine out, they were very, strict on what I should not do or do. I don't think I ate solid food for 4 days. Maybe I'm just a wimp. Story 39. Not a nurse, but I was the patient. Had my appendix taken out, and according to my sister and mother, I was convinced that one of the nurses in the recovery area was Raptor Jesus in disguise. This was years before Raptor Jesus became a meme on the internet, so I have no clue what made me keep calling him Raptor Jesus. A few years later, I had my wisdom teeth taken out and was convinced that I had to pack my bags because I was moving to Mars. My brothers showed me a video of myself packing a duffel bag about halfway, and then shouting that I packed for summer and Mars is obviously a winter planet, so I dumped out the bag and fell asleep on the floor. I love hearing about moments of logic in these sorts of mental states. It's just crazy to me how the brain can be like, no, that's not right. Mars is a winter planet, you idiot. But not at all thinking it's like, well, maybe we're not moving to Mars. Story 40. Obligatory, not a nurse, but a patient. Had a minor abdominal surgery done. Before the operation, I was told that there would almost certainly be an air bubble inside me that I would feel working its way around/up until it was absorbed by the body. As I'm being slid onto the bed in my room, one of the nurses says,
Is that supposed to be like that?
Now, hearing that question just out of surgery put me into a momentary panic. I start half awake asking, what? What's wrong? And the other nurse quickly explained that the air bubble had gone down, not up, and taken up residence in the nearest balloon-like appendage. I said, oh, let me update my Grindr account, and nodded off to sleep. Story 41. When I was waking up from knee surgery, the nurse asked me to rate my pain on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the worst. My brain had begun to spin up, but my eyes were still closed. I was feeling a little cheeky, and with the best English accent I could muster, I said, let's turn this baby up to 11, in an homage to Spinal Tap. In my brain, I sounded crisp and lucid, so lucid that I began to silently congratulate myself on my cleverness. In reality, it probably sounded like 11. During my internal revelry, I heard the nurse say with much concern,
Doctor, this patient is in severe pain.
In a split second, my drug-addled mind transitioned from the pride of my brilliance to sheer terror, as my mind screamed, it was a joke from a movie! I'm not in pain! Alas, my mouth wasn't cooperating, and I said nothing as the full dose of pain meds took hold and I can't remember what happened next. Story 42. Not a nurse, but the friend of someone who blew up his life coming out of anesthesia. Let's call my former friend M. M was married and he had to be rushed into emergency surgery due to some kind of bowel obstruction. Coming out of anesthesia with his wife sitting at the bedside, he admitted to A. Lying about having a job. Apparently he had been pretending to go to work for weeks and he'd actually been fired for tardiness and calling in too often. B. Spending thousands on adult entertainment lines and strippers, etc. And C. Cheating and or trying to cheat while out of the house pretending to be at work. His wife was at home packing his crap before he became fully conscious. Well, it's hard to feel bad for him. All three of those things should not have been taking place. I'm assuming they actually were. And his wife didn't leave him off of him saying random crap when he was drugged up. But it's got me thinking, hey, maybe someone up there was looking out for the wife. Story 43. Not a nurse, but I had surgery in December and March for carpal tunnel. I wasn't put out, but I was a wee bit high. My anesthesiologist saw me singing along to This Is Me on the radio. By the time we came out of the operating room, we were singing I've got a lovely bunch of coconuts, and managed to get the nurse and surgeon joining in. We went through a lot of show tunes, too. My boyfriend was laughing his head off in the waiting room. In March, we went in singing because he remembered me from before, and we started with Cabaret. I've got to be honest, I don't actually know the I've Got a Lovely Bunch of Coconuts tune. The only place I know it from is from The Lion King when Zazu sings it to Scar. So that's the frame of reference I had for the tune. Story 44. Not a nurse, of course, and this isn't something I've said so much as something I did. Apparently, while I was coming off anesthesia after the removal of my wisdom teeth, the nurse was trying to fill out some paperwork and remarked to someone that she needed a pen. Suddenly I, who by all means shouldn't have been conscious yet, whipped a pen out of my pocket and held it wordlessly straight up in the air, all without opening my eyes or showing any other sign of consciousness. The nurse was amazed, though I imagine a bit spooked. Story 45. I got my tonsils out in December, which I don't recommend doing in adulthood unless absolutely necessary. And when I woke up, I was having the best time ever, and I asked my nurse if I could have a Chick-fil-A sandwich. She said no. I asked again, and she still said no. Then she went to get my mom and I just started sobbing. When my mom got back there, the nurse looks at me and then back to my mom and goes, "I'm not sure what's wrong. She was okay literally a minute ago when I left." My mom came in and asked me what was wrong, and through heaving and sobbing I told her, "The nurse said I couldn't have a Chick-fil-A sandwich." She lost it laughing. Then I calmed down for a few minutes. The nurse came back to check on me and ask how I was doing. I told her I needed to speak with my doctor immediately. So she goes to grab him and he's all like, "Hey, what's up? How you doing?" And I asked him what his kids' names were. I don't even know how I knew he had kids. Story 46. Nurse anesthetist here. I had this young man come in for an upper endoscopy, and after I pushed the propofol to get him off to sleep, this dude sits straight up, singing the most incredible gospel music until the propofol finally won. Propofol always wins. After he woke up, I was like, "Bro, you can sing." Come to find out, he's a professional singer and has toured with some very famous people, and was about to try out for either American Idol or The Voice. Probably my favorite patient ever. Super nice and talented guy. Well, if he really is super talented, I hope he didn't sign up for American Idol at least. I don't know about The Voice, but I know American Idol is super bad. Like, the contract they get you to sign is super predatory or something, and you basically sign away your independent rights as an artist for multiple years. It doesn't seem worth it. I've heard people say that going second or third in American Idol is better than going first, because then you don't have all these contractual obligations. Wild stuff. Anyway, off topic. Story 47. Patient here coming off of 4 wisdom teeth removal. I asked for a full anesthesia for it. I speak both Indonesian and English fluently, and one of my Indonesian friends came with me to the surgery. I'm in Canada, by the way. When they woke me up after the surgery, the nurse spoke to me in English, and for some reason I looked at her like she was speaking in tongues, and my friend had to translate what she said to me in Indonesian. Apparently then I said, "Oh," and then answered her in English, but still didn't understand what she said in English back. So my friend kept translating. Drugs are weird. Story 48. Not a nurse, but an experienced patient. 15 surgeries, more procedures than I can remember. On one occasion when coming out of surgery, they gave me Ket for, if I recall, pain relief and to keep me calm. We discovered quickly, I have an adverse reaction to Ket. I'm normally a very quiet, reserved, calm person. With Ket on board, I swore at 3 nurses, yelled, screamed, tore apart part of the tissue box they left on my bed, and threw the remainder at them. Thankfully, they learned their lesson the second time and mixed it with something else. That way, I only yelled, screamed, swore, and threatened to punch a few people. Story 49. My husband had emergency surgery on Thanksgiving. When he was in recovery, he was in a big room that was totally empty because of the holiday, surrounded by beds that were all made up with big, fluffy white pillows and blankets. In his drugged haze, he thought it was all whipped cream and kept insisting he was now a pie. "I'm a pie now. I'm a pie. I'm a pumpkin pie." He was so happy. Story 50. My dad after heart procedure.
Do you see that?
No, Dad. What is it? While waving his hand around, he said,
It's a bunch of adjectives floating around in the air.
And then he fell back asleep while my sister and I died laughing. Story 51. Not a nurse, was a patient. I am a generally silly person. After anesthesia, I woke up fine. She brought me a drink. I sipped it. All was good. So she said she would come back and wheel me out to the room with my wife in just a minute. She comes back, unlocks the bed, and as she starts pushing, says, "Here we go." I responded by raising my arm up, tugging the invisible whistle cord and going, "Choo-choo!" The bed comes to a complete stop. She rushes around the front of it and with this panicked look goes, "Are you okay, sir? What are you feeling? Is everything all right?" I chuckled and went, "Yeah, the way you said that, I thought we were being silly. Back to serious, sorry." She started laughing and explained that sometimes people come out fine but have delayed reactions and she thought I was reacting. No, just a goofy goober. Story 52. When my dad was going under for his cardiac surgery, just when he got the very first meds to make him relaxed, he thought he was invisible. He tried to get up and sneak out because he thought no one could see him. A big 55-year-old man with his hospital gown gaping in the back so his butt shows, giggling and trying to sneak past us pushing his IV pole. Like, "Dad, what the hell? We can see you. Where are you going?" Story 53. My husband and I found out that when I come out of anesthesia, I could make a sailor blush. Had my wisdom teeth removed last year, and coming out of it, I first freaked out looking for him, completely missing the fact he was right next to me, then just started swearing for no reason. The nurse then started giving him instructions like no straws, no crunchy foods, no carbonated drinks like soda. At that last part, I popped my head up and went, "No sparkling water?" Which, frankly, is hard to say with gauze in your mouth. The nurse didn't understand me. My poor husband, trying not to laugh, said, I think she wants sparkling water. The nurse told me I couldn't have that, and I laid back down and went, well, that's freaking stupid. Story 54. I recently had surgery, and when they first woke me, they showed me the mass they'd removed from my abdomen. It looked like raw chicken. I asked if I could have it. They said no. Later, they gave me applesauce, which I hadn't had in at least 20 years, and I was over the moon about it. The nurse was unamused by my amazement, but reluctantly told me the brand name when asked. I now eat applesauce almost every day. Story 55. I had a softball-sized abscess on my butt cheek, like right next to my butthole. I was on antibiotics, but it just got worse. So I ended up in the ER when I could no longer walk from the pain. They put me on Ket to drain the damn thing. First, I kept repeating pain, 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 increasingly louder. Then suddenly, boom, was in Plantagenet-era England. I called my boyfriend the Duke of Buckingham, insisted he end the princess in the tower, over and over again. I kept trying to hit him, but all I could really do was kind of flop my arm and hand at him. Then I went back to pain, pain, pain. The nurse told me my boyfriend had been so good to me and I should be sweet to him. Then she told me she knew I was in pain and she was going to get me medicine. I told her to bring me willow bark and distilled vinegar. I don't know, I guess that was medicine back then. I know willow bark is aspirin. She brought Dilaudid. After all that, I still had to have surgery under general the next day and have my wound packed and repacked for weeks. It was lots of pain medicine and 4 different antibiotics before they found the right one. I ended up back in hospital a second time for IV antibiotics because nobody bothered to read the culture and realized I was on the wrong antibiotics. I started leaking this horrible smelling brown liquid. It was terrible. Oh, OP, this thread was so not gross until that. It was free not to add that last bit. You could have just stopped at the Dilaudid. Why have you done this? I hope none of you were eating right now. If so, I'm so sorry. Story 56. Not a nurse, but the patient. I was definitely looped up, and the dentist offered me my wisdom teeth. Apparently I was like, ooh, yes, really quietly. Showed them to my mom, who of course thought that was super gross. I was also really upset that they took my tongue. Anyway, when I got home, I apparently hid them under the microwave and promptly forgot about them until we replaced the microwave some months later. My mom was freaking out, but I vaguely remembered about them. Oh, that's where they went. OP, you're lucky that your family replaced your microwave soon. I feel like my microwave hasn't been replaced for a decade, so the odds of that are not high, at least in my experience. What a horrifying jump scare for whoever replaced that microwave. Story 57. I was in a terrible car accident, went off a bridge, and was trapped inside for a few hours, but had relatively minor injuries. When we were life-flighted to the hospital, they pumped us full of morphine. After a bit, I could hear my mom coming down the hallway. Where's OP? I'm her mom. So I turned to my nurse, who was trying to brush my hair, and said, just play along. My mom burst into the room crying, trying to hug me, saying, my baby. I look her dead in the eye and yell, who are you? She was so shocked until I started cackling. She still tells that story anytime we're at any gathering together. Story 58. I was the patient, and my dad told me this word for word. I was 16M at the time. TLDR, put my thumb into a nurse's eye. Me. Wakes up from anesthesia after getting all 4 wisdom teeth pulled. Room is empty. Immediately try to get out of the chair. Nurse. Runs in with my dad. Holds me down until I can get to a wheelchair. Me. Gets in wheelchair and immediately starts hitting on the nurse. You're hot. Let me take you to dinner when I'm sober, etc. Nurse. Haha, okay, sounds like a plan. Only to placate me. Before I go on, in my drugged up state, I convinced myself we were in a committed relationship. Me. Finally gets out to pick up truck. Demands a nurse to help me into the seat. Nurse helps me into the seat. Me. Aw, thanks, baby. Opens arms for hug. Nurse hugs me. As soon as she backed off, I looked her dead in the eye and apparently said, now give me some, and went to touch her chest, but my depth perception was all screwed up and I put a thumb in one of her eyes. She said, okay, take care, and hauled it inside. My dad was mad. But what was I to do? I was stoned. He laughed his butt off about me hitting on the nurse until I went to cop a feel. Before you give me hate, I want you to first be aware that I was beyond messed up from the anesthesia, and went to resolve this 2 days later and gave the nurse a card and flowers for me being an absolute idiot. I can see why OP felt the need to cover themselves here, but look man, you were hopped up on a lot of drugs, and hey, you went and tried to make it right too. Nurses have to deal with a lot of crap. It's unfortunately just part of the job. Dealing with a lot of drugged up patients, there's bound to be a few that are like this. And once again, not really your fault. Good on you for still trying to make it right though with the card and flowers. That's an awesome move, OP. Story 59. Not a nurse, but my uncle came out of surgery pretty out of it, only coming out of anesthesia. His son and I were there to watch over him, and he spent an entire hour just gushing about his son, his daughter, my dad, and I. He's the sort to never tell anyone his feelings, and the only other time he was this honest and emotional was when he was drunk. He also apologized a lot for shooting me and his son that one time. OP, sorry, back up a second? What do you mean for shooting you and his son that one time? I'm gonna need a bit more. Spoiler, there's no more. Story 60. When I came out of wisdom teeth surgery, I was only using sign language. My eyes and mouth wouldn't work, but I could fingerspell completely. And the nurses went and got my mom so she could come translate. I said my mouth hurt and I needed more medicine, and apparently it freaked out the doctor, because people shouldn't be able to communicate yet at that point of the wake up or something. I do remember vaguely being mad because my mom hadn't been practicing, so she took forever to read each letter and I had to repeat a lot. Don't know if my signs were sloppy, likely, or she just wasn't expecting a quiz that day, also likely. Story 61. The nurses came to get me when my husband woke up, surgery on his right hand. They had him in that hospital gown thing. I tried to help him get dressed and into his regular clothing, but he insisted he could do it. He was struggling to get his pants up. I asked him if he was supposed to unbutton them first, so he unbuttoned them, pulled them up, and tried to leave with them open and no shirt on. I laughed loud enough a nurse came to see the commotion. Anyway, we convinced him to put on the rest of his clothes. As for what he said, he just kept repeating to himself what day it was, where he was, and our home address. He was trying to sober up faster because this wasn't his first surgery. Story 62.
Quick, get me a gun. I'm gonna end that freaking spider.
Or,
You better check on him. I think he's dead.
points at empty chair. Who? Patient, startled.
Oh, I guess he must be okay then.
Get a lot of compliments from ladies, and they always reach out and grope my shoulders and forearms and giggle, which always makes my day, but I'm really not that good looking. There's a lot of chuckling and mumbling, equal parts of giggling and saying how good they feel, and also people vomiting from anesthesia. Story 63. Obligatory not a nurse. I ended up needing an emergency C-section. Apparently I have a high tolerance for Fent, because I was still kind of wincing when they started to cut into me initially. My anesthesiologist stopped them and shot me up with a crap ton more. Things get hazy from there, and I don't remember half the crap I kept trying to say to everyone around me. But I do remember saying, "I'm sorry. I'm really high right now," on repeat throughout it all. And then I yelled at this woman nurse who showed me my son upside down. Then I was out for hours. I woke up still high as hell and told my husband how stupid that nurse was who showed me our son upside down, and he was like, that wasn't a nurse. That was me. And by upside down, I really was just looking at him sideways. Oh, and super freaking high still. Story 64. Not a nurse, but I was injected with a whole bunch of crap after trying to overdose on antidepressants last year. I remember the hospital lights being really bright, so my boyfriend put his hand in front of my face to shield me from the light. Somehow I knocked out and woke up in a suite instead of the emergency room. I don't remember how I got there, but apparently after they transferred me to my room, my boyfriend took a photo of the snacks in the vending machine to see if I wanted anything. He said I was half awake when he showed me a photo. As he was showing me the photo / zooming in and listing each individual snack, he told me that I said, "Why are you showing me a photo of a girl who's your type?" I was very insecure back then because I knew physically I wasn't his type. Him. What? Me. Right there, that girl, she's your type. Him. Turns the phone around to see what I'm pointing at. Who's my type? Chester Cheeto? He said I then knocked back out after accusing Chester of being his type. We eventually broke up. I wonder if he's dating Chester now. Story 65. When I was about 8, I had a tooth out with gas. All seemed normal until my dad came into the room, needles hidden away, and he asks if I'm fine. I nod, walk out, and the dentist is impressed. Dad goes to pay, and I start laughing. Not manic, but almost. Dad laughs a bit, receptionist laughs a bit, and even the other people in the office. I didn't stop laughing and fell on the floor in a flop motion, and then started to laugh even harder. My dad had to carry me to the car. We got home and I tried to walk in and nope, still laughing and not walking. So my dad dumps me on the couch and leaves me there till I stopped. Story 66. Obligatory not a nurse. Patient coming around from a transurethral resection of prostate op. Ask the nurse to kiss his dong better. The best part was the surgeon knew the patient had dementia and was prone to inappropriate conversation, and said to the nurse as he left, "I need to know exactly what he says when he wakes up," with a deadly serious face on. Okay, I must be a little bit stupid or something. I initially thought it was OP asking the nurse to kiss the patient's dong better. I don't know. It just took me a little bit too long to clue into who said what. Story 67. Had a really bad wisdom teeth situation that I had to be put all the way out for. I woke up with swollen cheeks, still very drugged up. All I could think of was a picture of a walrus since my bottom lip was swollen. My parents tried to talk to me for a good 10 minutes, but I was concentrating so hard on remembering the word for walrus that I didn't pay attention. All of a sudden, I just tell them, very seriously, I am an upside-down walrus, and proceeded to giggle and repeat it for a while. Then the nurse gave me the ice pack holder that goes around your head, and I needed a mirror so she could show me how to put it on. Apparently, I thought I looked like an egg. Something clicked and I started saying, I am the Eggman. I am the walrus. Cuckoo, ka-choo. I don't know how YouTube's music bot searching thing works, so I'm not taking chances with singing it. Singing the Beatles seems like a great way to lose monetization. Sorry people, we would like some money. Story 68. High school. I was 16 having knee surgery. I came to in the post-op room, didn't have my glasses so everything was blurry. 2 female nurses were standing over me, whispering to each other about who the doctor across the room was, since neither seemed to know him. I said, I got this. Then proceeded to yell, Hey, big sexy! Then, after I was wheeled to a recovery room, the preacher from a church came to visit and tried to steal my toast. I told him to go to hell. Story 69. Came out of surgery. Spinal fusion. 3 vertebrae fused together in my neck. Learn to lift the right way, kids. In the recovery room, the nurses are bringing me out. How are you feeling? Was the operation a success? Yes, the surgery went perfectly. Surgery? No. What about Ford? You got him, right? His damned cars will end us all. Okay, he's still coming out of it. The nurses had fun telling me that one later. Story 71. Me getting an impacted wisdom tooth removed. Had to be put under. We were waiting for the solution to kick in. They said I would start to feel a little drunk and then pass out. Nothing was happening and we were chatting as I hated needles and they were trying to distract me. Oh, you work for X? Isn't that a dying industry? Ha, look, I really appreciate the attempt to distract me, but it's not gonna... Gone. I was under for, an hour or so, but to me it was instant. Like a light went off and then back on again. I came to and looked at the nurse to my right and the male nurse ahead of me, looked back and forth between them and slurred, You aren't the women I was talking to a minute ago? Which gave them a good laugh. Story 72. A patient who is recovering from a TURP, prostate surgery through the urethra, developed a clot in his urethra, and the urologist was irrigating it bedside to no avail. Syringe and dong. The back pressure of the clogged dong caused huge blood clot, blood, and saline to spray back at us all, the bed, the wall. He went to the OR to have another catheter placed. When his family was told he was going back to surgery, what seemed to be his entire family showed up and piled into his room. They were loud and anxious, and when my patient wheels back in with a new catheter and still loopy on meds, looks at me and says, Sorry, I got my dong juice all over you. 3 generations of anxious family just stared at me in silence. Story 73. I never actually found out what I did or said waking up, but every time a nurse or doctor came to see me after, they had a huge smile on their face. Something definitely happened in surgery they all found humorous, but I could never bring myself to ask what was making them all smile. All I remember is I woke up from surgery and said to a nurse, I'm going to be sick. Then the next thing I knew was waking up back in the ward. I really hope I didn't projectile vomit on her, but I have this awful feeling that I did. Story 74. I got surgery on my toe. They hit me hard with anesthesia, but for some odd reason I kind of woke back up a little during the operation and slowly sprung up to try and look around at what they were doing. No pain, nothing. I could barely feel the funny feeling of them touching my foot. I asked the nurse, What is he doing? Pointing at the surgeon. They laughed, then told me to lie back down. Apparently I said, well, okay, I was just wondering. Like a kid who didn't get what he wanted. Story 75. I was coming out of surgery, just waking up in recovery, and croaked out a request for water from the orderly. He brought me some, and as I was drinking, I noticed the orderly had a shiner. Eyes swollen, almost shut, all red and starting to bruise. I asked, what happened to you? You did. Coming out of anesthesia, you got violent and clocked me. Oh, that's why my hand hurts. I apologized and was told, it happens more often than you think. When I got to my room, I had my wife send a dozen donuts to the recovery room staff. Story 76. Back when I was in college, I was caring for an old lady who, before her hip surgery, was the sweetest thing I've ever met. A grandma through and through. After the surgery, though, she turned into the rowdiest sailor you'd ever met. She tried picking a fight with all the female nurses and tried to screw both me and the doctor, who were the only 2 guys. That was an interesting one. There was one time a little girl had to get her appendix removed. She woke up and thought she was a bird and wanted to fly away. Thankfully, being a big guy, it wasn't hard holding her down myself while the other nurse strapped her down. Another one that stands out to me was this huge, tough dude that after his surgery started crying, confessing he had to act like a strong, dominant man, and that wasn't him at all, because otherwise he would lose his children that he loved dearly. Apparently, he was gay, and thankfully his very religious wife wasn't there at the time. I helped him through that, being gay myself. I hope things worked out for him. But it wasn't just others. I too went a little loopy. Apparently during surgery I kept telling the surgeon that he was cutting the wrong things and cut that instead. Also when I was recovering I remember smelling waffles and wanted to go to IHOP, so sure enough, I tried. When I was, quote, caught, quote, I proceeded to hum the theme for Metal Gear, the OG one on the PlayStation, because I was caught. Yeah, I don't remember any of that. Well, clearly, OP, your mistake was not finding a nice cardboard box. With that, no one would have seen you coming, or leaving. Story 77. I'm not a nurse, but this one is about myself. I had shoulder surgery and my first formed memory of me waking up in the recovery wing was tucking my leg underneath me and telling a nurse that I, quote, can't feel my leg. Is it all right? End quote. And her response was, you already tried that on me. Nice try. My fiance tells me I was trying that joke to everyone that walked by my bed, and I was just so drugged up and blacked out I had no memory of it. Story 78. Not a nurse, but I can share a story of something I said while going under. Back in college, I was in the ER with a badly dislocated shoulder. They had to put me under, but the first dose left me loopy, not unconscious. The doctor came in to finish the job, and the nurse, presumably at the end of a 12-hour shift, mentioned how exhausted she was. I mumbled, if you're sleepy and he's doc and I'm dopey, one more dwarf and we have a quorum. My next conscious moment was waking up in another room. I hope they got a chuckle out of my super nerdy drug-induced dad joke. Story 79. Not a nurse, but was in charge of my sister after she got her foot operated on and was on strong painkillers. She was sitting on the couch and I had gone to the kitchen to get her something. When I came back, she asked if the music lady had already come by. She got really annoyed and angry when I didn't know what she was talking about. She then started ranting about a party she was apparently throwing for the dogs, and that she was tired of me never helping out with planning it. It was really weird. Story 80. I had some recent surgery, and they gave me this little container to hold my hearing aids in, and they attached the container to your bed or something so they don't get lost when they take them out before surgery. The container was pink, and I thought my young daughter would like it post-surgery, so I asked if I could keep it. They said it was mine now to keep. After waking up slowly, the nurses helped me put my hearing aids back in, and said they wanted to take the pink container from my hand and put it on my side so they can check me in the recovery room. They said I had a death grip on the container so I could give it to my daughter. They tried to take it from my hands, but I would not let go. Death gripped the container from the recovery room back to my regular room. Story 81. Had a patient that was super genuinely concerned because he couldn't remember a name that he was supposed to remember. We tried to reassure him it was okay as we moved him to the bed, but he kept freaking out about the name. After a while, he said, I think the name was Bob? I kind of chuckled to myself. I introduced myself as he was going under and it must have stuck. He said my name, by the way. So I told him he didn't need to remember that name. He looked at me with all the puppy dog innocence in the world and said, promise? After I said promise, he calmed down. He was a full-grown man and it was very cute. Story 82. I knew someone staying on the 4th floor of a hospital. He was on a medicine that he had a bad reaction to. Mentally, he was back in World War II and the Germans were coming. He got up and used old man strength to lift the heavy sliding table that goes above and over the bed for eating and tossed it out the window. Down below was a patient discharge door and it went through the windshield of a guy who was picking up his wife and newborn. Luckily, no one was hurt, and the hospital settled quickly. When I went to visit that day, I was like, why is he in a new room in restraints with a guard? My real problem was the nurse told visiting distant family that he must have been a secret alcoholic detoxing. In reality, it was a known side effect of Pepsid 4. Story 83. In high school, I had many cavities to take care of, so they did fillings in one half of my mouth and then a month later did the other half. I had the happy pills for both. I went in the second time and the pills hadn't hit me yet and the dentist says, we enjoyed your concert last time. I was like, oh crap. What concert? Your concert. Evanescence? Which was in fact the music I'd been listening to the last time. Apparently I sang through the whole procedure, mouth open, hi. They heard me in the waiting room. Well, if you were singing through the whole thing, I guess they didn't have to wake you up at the end. Story 84. Not a nurse, but a patient. A couple years ago, I started to have extremely bad pains in my left side. Long story short, it was kidney stones. Worst pain I've ever felt. I got misdiagnosed twice and sent home twice. Third time calling the ambulance, they decided to keep me in and x-ray me. On the way to the hospital, I was put on gas and air. Apparently, I was flirting with my own mother and kept trying to hold her hand. The paramedic next to me just couldn't stop laughing, and neither could my mom. I remember talking to them, just not that other part that I cringe at. Story 85. I've gone through a lot of surgeries, and I am always notoriously hungry afterwards because of the fasting you have to do. I'm also notoriously over-emotional, both going in and coming out. Once I was coming out of the anesthesia after eye surgery and my mom was trying to coax me up. She said, "I have a sandwich for you." It was around 6 p.m. and I hadn't eaten the entire day. My eyelids were still numb and I couldn't see, so I mumbled, "What kind?" And she said, "Tuna." Canned tuna is one of the few things I just won't eat, and I was so devastated I started bawling. It was actually a chicken sandwich and she wanted to mess around with me, but I never really forgave her for that. Messing around with someone coming out of anesthesia just seems like a bad idea. They're gonna take everything so seriously, or sometimes not seriously, I guess. The point is they're unpredictable. I'm sorry for the mental torment you went through that day, OP. If only your mother had just said it was chicken. Anyway, that's the last story we have for today. I'm not gonna lie, it was kinda nice having one that wasn't so, serious. I feel like almost everyone I narrate is pretty serious, so a nice change of pace for me. I hope you enjoyed it as well. For now, though, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.